Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and on today's video I am going to show you a book which is actually the first history book I ever owned. Now the book in question isn't the original one, and I actually know where the original one is. As you're probably aware, I am actually the youngest in the family. I was the baby, still am the baby of the family, and therefore when people had finished with a lot of things, I used to in a way obtain them at a later date really. And the book that I'm going to show you any second is my first history book. And like I said, this isn't the original. The original is still at the family home, and Mandy, you're listening to this, I'm sure, is probably, I'm pretty sure of this, got it on the shelf in her room. So this is another edition, and it's an edition that I found in a charity shop. But like I said, this is my first history book that I am actually aware of. I don't think there was any other book that I had on history to spark my interest as such really. So this is the book in question. Now I don't know if anyone else watching this actually had this book, but believe it or not, this had a big influence on my career in Discover History that I'm now doing, obviously. So this is a book that was written by R.J. Unstead, and it's a pretty old book. It's not as old as some books I've got. I've actually got 17th century books and things like that, but this is relatively an old book. So this one was printed in 1966, except the first edition of it came out in 1955, then there was an edition in 1963, and obviously this one in 1966. I also believe it was reprinted in the 1980s as well. Mandy will have to have a look on her bookshelf, that's my sister, and I'd be quite interested to know what date is on the inside cover of that one, but this one's 1966. But R.J. Unstead wrote Looking at History as an interest book more than anything. So it's not a book for a scholar. It's definitely not a book that should be used in school as such. It would be useful in a school, to be fair, but this is a hardback book. And what amazes me is I remember my sisters, for example, looking at this when they had a history project when they were at school, and then eventually when they all did A-levels and things like that, I obtained the book. But like I said, this now sits, I think, on my sister's bookcase still really, but I think it was a very, very good book. However, thinking back now and looking through it again, there are a few errors in it. And this is what I keep finding, and this is what I keep reminiscing about at school. For example, when I was at school, for example, I was taught there was a difference between, for example, the Cavalier in the Roundhead, the Royalist and the Parliamentarian. However, now with modern research, for example, or research in the last, let's say, 20 or 30 years, we now know that there was no difference. And maybe we could do a video specifically on that. As we famously know, parliamentarians and royalists absolutely look the same. Some had long hair, some had short hair, and so on. But sadly, it's the Victorians that gave us this idea that the Cavaliers were the brightly dressed, brightly coloured people, and in the Roundheads were all Puritans in dull, for example. So one of the first illustrations in this book, and this is the amazing thing, it is black and white, but there are colour illustrations in it, is this one, and this influenced me quite a bit. So this is just really inside the front cover, and it shows an argument between, as it says, a skirmish between Cavaliers and Cromwell's Ironsides. Now look at them for colourful soldiers. You can see, for example, the very colourful Cavaliers, the slashed doublet, feathered hats, for example, lacy collars, and look at those fine boots. But then the Parliamentarians, these Roundheads, look a little bit, what can I say really, a bit dull compared with the Cavaliers. But what is interesting is the fine fencing foils that they have in their hand, and the fact that they're wearing what is technically the tri-bar pot, which is what we used to believe what parliamentarians or Roundheads used to wear really years ago. So that's probably the first illustration in the book. I'm pretty sure it is actually. But like I said, there are many pictures in here, and the one that sticks out vividly, if you had actually showed me this cover looking at history and said, tell me what sort of pictures in there, this is the one I will describe. And I don't know why, but it had a big influence on me, and it's the view inside a roundhouse. And I don't know why it sticks out vividly. If someone gave me a piece of paper, I could draw that from memory. I don't know why, but it shows a warrior, a chieftain as such, out on the inside what could be an Iron Age hill fort, for example, inside a settlement. And then you've got the ladies in here using a saddle quern to grind flour, and you also have them working on a very bright check piece of cloth on a loom, for example. And I don't know why, but strangely it's something that sticks in my head. But it's a fantastic history book. Like I said, there are a few errors in it now. In modern day, we know there are errors. But generally, it was the book that got me hooked on history. And like I said, it was technically my first history book. Yes, I had it handed down to me. And this is only a copy of it. But this is the first history book that gave me the big influence of what is now what we've created as Discover History. Now, if I turn to the page on the Anglo-Saxons and also looking at the Danes, what is quite interesting, it says here, the Danes were also called Vikings or Norsemen, which is technically correct. And then it says they usually wore horned or winged helmets. And obviously we know that they definitely didn't wear them. If you have a look at the one illustration here by my thumb, you will see a winged helmet, and this really comes from Victorian myths being drawn, for example, in ideas of what Thor and Odin looked like. And then down here you've got some poor monks cowering, trying to protect their altar in the church, and you will notice once again by my thumb they have horned helmets, which obviously we know is incorrect. But when I was growing up, that didn't bother me, to be fair. I didn't know any different, and I thought this book was fantastic. The writing is just enough, I think, on each topic, and it takes you chronologically, which is important. And then the black and white images, these line drawings, I think are absolutely fantastic. And then adding to that are all the colour illustrations, and I think it's the colour illustrations that stayed in my memory the longest, really. This is a lovely illustration of an Elizabethan privateer, and if you notice in his hand, this is the detail that I like about this book. In his right hand you can actually see a backstaff, which is one of the instruments used in navigation, a bit like a quadrant really, or what later became a sextant, for example. But this is another picture that stays in my memory. If you give me a piece of paper, show me that cover and said, draw a picture, not only is that roundhouse in my memory, it's also this one of a Royal Navy press gang. Absolutely brilliant illustrations, really colourful, bright, and these are the sort of things that really set me up getting into heritage, and then going on to working in a museum initially, which is where I met Helen, and then in 2003 setting up Discover History. So the reason for this video was really down to the fact that a lot of people do ask me on a regular basis, what got me involved in history? Well, there are several reasons behind that. One is this history book has a big part to play. The other one is the fact that my dad used to take me to a museum virtually every Saturday. It was quite common. My mom and my sisters would go shopping, and it sounds very sexist, but myself and Mark would go to a museum. And one of the main places that we pretty much lived in every weekend, there was two actually. One was the Commandery, which we were always going in, and this was when it was a completely different museum, actually before it was a Civil War centre. And the other one was Tudor House, which was obviously owned by the Museum Service, and technically it's still owned by the Museum Service, but it's sort of leased out now to the Worcestershire Heritage and Amenity Trust. In those two places, along with visits to, for example, the archaeological dig in Deansway in the late 80s, 70s were a big influence on my life, really. And ever since that, and when I was at school doing careers, for example, it was always museums that I wanted to work in, or heritage that I wanted to work in. And then even when I did work experience with the school, I did work experience at the Commandery, I also did work experience at the Cathedral, and also the Dyson Perrins Museum, which is now known as the Royal Worcester Porcelain Museum. So heritage is literally within me. If you cut me in half, a bit like a stick of rock, for example, it will have history running all the way through it. So that's the only reason for this video, really, just to say what influenced me, because I do get asked that question a lot. But I've got a question for everyone else. Do you still own your first history book? Have you got the book that influenced you? There may be someone out there that's got a book on, for example, the Battle of Waterloo, and I believe Ian Riley's got one on that, or used to have one on that. Is there any specific history books that you like? I know a lot of people today will probably say it will be the Horrible History Collection. That's the book that's influenced my love of history, for example. However, just to conclude, this was the book for me, really. And like I said, this is sadly not the original. I had to get this from a charity shop, but I believe, and Mandy will have to check this, my sister should have this still on a bookcase, and I'll be quite interested to know the date of it, because like I said, this one's 1966. If you do see this book in a charity shop, buy it, because personally, apart from the few errors in it, it is an absolutely fantastic book. I will not get rid of this, because this has a lot to play in what I do now with Discover History. So let us know. Subscribe, maybe comment on here, or comment on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram when we post it on there. Let us know what history book was your first one, or your most influential history book. On that note, stay safe, and we'll see you for another video tomorrow. Bye bye.